Hello everybody and welcome back to Heart Breathings. I am excited to have our final official video in the How to Plan and Write a series of videos. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed these and that you've gotten a lot of information out of them. I had so many questions though that we're gonna have to break this up into a two-part Q&A. So today is going to be part one of the Q&A and I will do part two of the Q&A next week. If you have additional questions that you'd like to get addressed, go ahead and leave them in the comments of this video, and if there's time left over in next week's Q&A, I will answer as many of those as possible too. I will, by popular demand, also be adding an extra kind of bonus video on the difference between a serial and a series and some of the best practices in publishing a serial, because many of you are interested in this and I do have some experience with it with my serial called Sacrifice Me. So I'm going to talk about that in a future video coming up, but this actually is a fun Q&A that I've been looking forward to doing. So grab a cup of coffee or whatever your preferred beverage is, tea or water, and let's hang out for a little bit and talk about writing a series and publishing as an indie author. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions here that came from the Google form and from Instagram. And in every situation, I wasn't able to see who asked the question. So I'm not gonna name any names. I'm just gonna ask the question in general and do my best to answer it. Obviously, I don't know everything. And a lot of indie publishing or how to write and how to do a series is really down to opinion. So if something I say doesn't resonate with you and you think, well, that's not right for me, that's totally fine. I completely believe that you should always follow your gut instinct. But my other warning for you here is, while you should follow your own gut instinct, it's always important to double check your fear, because a lot of times when we're afraid, we refuse to listen to really good advice. And sometimes what you need to hear can be difficult to hear. So I will come to you with honest and authentic advice based on 10 years of writing and indie publishing and a lot of different experience and a lot of book sales. And I will just give you my best advice. But it's totally okay if you disagree, and feel free to put your own beliefs and opinions in the comments. As long as you're kind and respectful, I welcome any other discussion on these topics. And let's just get started. Is it best to publish a standalone romance series in chronological order? I'm in edits on what I thought was book one, but it turns out two characters from book one are demanding their own stories, which would make book one into book three. What do you think? So I think when it comes to standalone romances, it is so much better if you have the books written in order. If that character that you're thinking of writing, the one that was maybe a side character that now becomes a hero or heroine, now gets their own book, if they're already hooked up, you're going to have to go back and tell their story before they hook up so that the reader can be a part of that journey. I feel like you're kind of cheating readers, and a lot of readers are going to feel cheated if they see heroine A with hero A already together in book one, and then in book three you go back and tell it as a backstory. I think that that is going to really kind of mess up the flow. And one of the main things when you're writing a standalone series in romance that readers love is watching the journey of how these characters got together. Sometimes it can be good, like at the end of a long series, to go back and tell a previous story, backstory of like, oh, here's the mom and dad and here's how they fell in love. That can be a good kind of side story. But for the most part, I think you're going to have better luck and better readership in terms of satisfaction if you tell it in chronological order. So if book one now becomes book three, that's fine. Just go back before you publish the book you're already writing and write what is going to be truly book one of your series and start there, because I think it's just best if you start from the beginning and tell it chronologically, unless there was some kind of reason why you wanted to tell it out of order, like secrets that you wanted to keep and that was part of the like framing device of the series. Unless it's like imperative to the way you're telling the story, it's going to be better to tell it in chronological order. So a little bit more work for you before you can publish, but yeah, go back and write the real book one. In video number 7, you said you switched from writing romance to writing YA fantasy. How do you switch from one genre to another without losing your fan base? Or did you just have to start all over from scratch? So I'm sorry if this was confusing. I started out writing contemporary romance, but I never published those books. So So the book that I wrote, I submitted to Harlequin and it was rejected, which actually turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. And then I started writing YA fantasy. The first book that I ever published was Beautiful Demons, which is a YA contemporary fantasy. And that's where I started building my fan base. Now, I did switch though. Once I got all the way through book 6 of my YA series that was my most popular and still is my most popular series, I did switch to a couple different genres. I published a new adult contemporary romance series called the Fairhope series, completely different genre. There's no speculative elements. There's no paranormal. It's just emotional contemporary romance. And that was a definite switch. I also switched a little bit when I changed subgenres within YA and went from a YA contemporary fantasy, witches type story, to a YA more like dystopian post-apocalyptic series with zombies. So you still have witch elements in that series, but it did switch subgenres or niches there. So I have definitely played around with different genres. Now, here's the thing. This is one of those things where I try to tell people as kindly and succinctly as possible that the more you can stick with the same genre and even the same niche, the better off you're going to be in terms of building your fan base. That is what I did for the first 2 full years of my career. I concentrated not only on one genre, but also one series. And that built up over 100,000 sales for me and really got me started and developed a fan base. When I switched to new adult contemporary, it was kind of like starting over because there were a lot of the fans of my YA fantasy that were just not interested in reading sex scenes or romance or contemporary things. They like the things that go bump in the night and they didn't want to read something that was different. And then I also had people that didn't want to read zombies. They just wanted my Shadow Demon Saga or something witchy and like it. So whenever you switch genres, you're always going to have people that are going to drop off. One thing you need to understand about indie publishing in general is that you're going to have people drop off. It's not like you ever gain a fan and they're a fan for life every single time. You're always going to have an ebb and flow. But what you want to do as your primary job is to continue bringing in new readers as well as keeping the readers that you have as much as possible. When you switch from one series to another, even if they're in the exact same genre, you are going to potentially lose people. The same is true for when you get 6 or 7 books down the road in a series. Every single new book, you're going to lose a few people. So you want to always be bringing new people in. But when you totally switch genres, that's when you're going to lose the most people. And it will be kind of like starting over. So you need to keep that in mind, especially those of you that are really multi-passionate and you say, well, I'm going to write this YA fantasy, but I'm also going to write this mystery thriller, and I'm going to start a pen name in erotic romance. And you want to do all of it all at once. If you want to write multiple genres, one of the best things you can do for yourself is focus on a single genre, a single series, a single niche until you've got some traction. Then once you've got a big fan base, it gives you a little bit more wiggle room in terms of how much you can afford at that point to switch, because you will have some people that will follow you over, but it's pretty complicated. And I just think that you need to be prepared to start over almost every series you write, as well as every new genre. My question is regarding advertising. Do you recommend Amazon, Facebook, or even Google advertising tools? Do you recommend local advertising like newspapers, flyers, etc.? What advertising tools have served you best? So advertising is tricky because you could have 5 different best-selling authors and they could all have a completely different marketing strategy. And this is something that I could talk about for 6 or so hours, which is why the marketing module of my Publish and Thrive class is like an 8-hour module, because there's a lot of information that goes into it. The shortest answer is find the advertising tools that work for you, which for most indie authors is going to be either a mix or some kind of diving into the following things: Facebook, Amazon, and BookBub CPM ads. Those are your kind of pay per click type advertising. Or on the other side of it, your newsletter or promo deal sites like BookBub, FreeBooksy, and other newsletters that go out to readers who are looking for deals. So those are kind of the two biggest ways to advertise your books, and those are the two most valuable ways to advertise your books as indies. Google Ads or AdSense has not been successful for anyone I know. And I have a lot of friends that have tried to make it work, and they haven't seen any result. That doesn't mean it won't work for you, but just know that most authors have not had a lot of success with Google. So if you're going to do those sort of pay-per-click ads, it's Amazon, Facebook, and BookBub are the ones that work the best. When it comes to local advertising, like newspaper and flyers and stuff like that, you're really going to see very little return for it. I mean, if you want to build a career for yourself where you're going out and doing book signings at like state fairs or local like farmers markets and stuff like that, you can definitely build a little bit there. But when you talk about like your ebook audience and your audience on Amazon, you're talking about a global audience, and you're building a potential readership of millions. When you're talking about your local farmers market or whatever, you might be talking about a local readership of like 50 to 100 people. And I don't want to downplay that because that can be good, but you're not going to be able to scale that. It's not like your local farmers market is suddenly going to get you discovered in 99.9%. So for most indies, I recommend you focus on those two types of online advertising, which is the pay-per-click ads or the deal site ads. And that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck and the most progress for your time. Can you please tell me more about emoting and tenses in writing? So this is another, I feel like a lot of these questions are things that we could do like entire hour-long or courses based on. But I will say this, I don't really want to talk too much about emoting because I don't feel like I can talk succinctly about that. But I do have some things to say about tense, and that is, one of the best things that you can do for yourself is once you've decided the kind of book, like the niche or genre that you are writing, read a bunch of books in that genre and pay attention to the tense that is used, because you will typically find that each genre or even each little subgenre or niche will have its most commonly used tense. And you will serve yourself very well if you do what is most common, because readers are used to reading that. So if readers pick up like a really dark new adult romance, they're going to be expecting first person past tense or even first person present tense. And so if they get a third person past tense, it might be kind of jarring for them. The same goes with the majority of young adult contemporary fantasy. For example, things like The Hunger Games or Divergent usually are going to be told in first person. And if a reader picks up a book like that and it's in third person, they might be jarred by it. Alternatively, if you pick up like an epic fantasy and it's in first person, that might be jarring for a reader who's used to a more like omniscient third person tense. So one of the best things you can do for yourself is read widely in the genre that you intend to write and pay attention to what tense is being used. The most common tenses that you see in fiction are going to be first person past tense, like I walked into the room and he looked at me, or third person past tense, which is she walked into the room and he looked at her. Or sometimes you will also see first person present tense that's like, I walk into the room and he looks at me. So it's happening in the moment. And those are the three most common that you will see. Now, whether it's close or far in third person, like omniscient, like you might have with Harry Potter, or it's really closely written, like My Eternal Sorrow series, just depends on the genre. Once you find out and you've decided what you're going to write, read it and pay attention to what's being used and use what's normal or average in your genre. If you're writing a series, is it advisable to draft the whole series or multiple books in rapid succession and edit it one book at a time and have a faster release schedule, like 2 to 3 months apart? I know a few that have done this and want to know your thoughts. So I have an entire video on rapid release and whether you should rapid release. So I will link that for you down below to give you a little bit more information on my thoughts on rapid release. I think that it can be helpful. I think there are also pitfalls when it comes to it, and it's going to come down to your process and your personality. So not everyone, first of all, can afford to write 5 books and then produce them all and release them very rapidly, because for each each book that you write, you've got editing costs, cover art, all of the things that go into promoting the books and that sort of thing. So if you don't have a lot of money up front, you might need to publish your first and second books and then use the proceeds from those books to pay for the next books. And you might not have, $5,000 just ready to put in so that you can produce those 5 books. So you need to look at it from a practical stance as well as a marketing stance. Another thing is, one of the advantages to writing it that way is, let's say you write the first 3 books and then you go back and edit, you can add a lot more foreshadowing and breadcrumbs and things to the first book so that it becomes a stronger lead-in to book 2. And then book 2 can be a little stronger, and then book 3. So it might actually help with the continuity of the series as well as the readability of it and the excitement and what draws the reader to the next book if you wrote them all in draft and then went back. However, it can be a trap too, because I have known people that have spent like a year writing the first 3 or 4 books. And then when they go back to book 1, their writing has changed and grown so much that then they spend the next year of their life rewriting book 1 and trying to make it into what they want it to be. Another pitfall of doing this kind of rapid release and rewriting your whole series ahead of time is that you don't have any feedback coming in. So you write book 1, you write book 2, and so on, and you don't actually know if people like these characters, if they like your writing, if you're going to be successful with this particular series. You don't have any feedback, whether good or bad. So you don't have any encouragement. You're just kind of writing in your own vacuum. And that can be harder than it seems, to just write your own stories and not have any kind of feedback for it, because you're not getting the satisfaction of good reviews and the momentum that's coming or income that's coming in. What that can often lead to is you get 3 books in and you suddenly don't even like your story anymore. You're not feeling any motivation. You're not feeling any draw and need to go and write it. So you kind of get tired of your own characters and your own, voice when it comes to it. And you don't have the fans waiting for the next book to kind of pressure you and convince you to write the next one. So that can be a pitfall that leads to this grand plan that you never really follow through on. So that's why I say it comes back to your personality and what you want to do. But I do think that if you can come up with a writing schedule that allows you to publish your books every 2 to 3 months, it's going to help you sell books faster. And I've talked about this in several videos before that I will link for you down below. Sarah, can you tell me your thoughts on chapter length? I've seen videos pretty much on the length of everything else, but not actual chapters. I've sort of been going with the flow, but I'm not sure what's the right way to do this. So there is no standard right way. I have known some writers that say every chapter is 4,000 words, and this is how long it is. I write scenes. So chapter 1 might be a 2-page scene. Chapter 2 might be a 10-page scene, and every chapter varies. And I go based more on pacing and feel and flow of when I really need a break. I love personally, in my type of genre and my style of writing, to go until it feels like a natural breaking point. And sometimes I'm breaking it in the middle of a scene because it's kind of a miniature cliffhanger. And I love for every single scene I have, or every chapter I have, to end on what they call a symbol crash, where it's like, dun, 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 you got to turn that next page. And I find that to be a really fun way to write. But your style and the way you write might be different, but just know that in general, there is no every chapter needs to be 4,000 words. I would say that another good thing that you can do for yourself, same thing I was talking about with the tense, is depending on what genre you decide you're writing in, go and pick up 10 books by different authors in that genre and pay attention. Is there a norm in terms of 10 pages per chapter? Every chapter has a specific, if you're in a mystery, every chapter is a different piece of the investigation, or a different investigative chunk, or a new clue is revealed in every chapter. And start looking for those patterns, because you're going to learn more from those authors that have been doing it for a long time than you will from anything else. So I would not necessarily try to keep your chapters to a specific length more than the chapter is as long as it needs to be. But with that, just saying that read what is happening in your genre and try to pay attention to what the norms are so that you can kind of fall into line. But I think it would be a mistake to be like, well, every chapter needs to be 4,000 words, so I'm going to stuff it with stuff that is not like really important to the book just so I can hit that word count. It's much, much better idea to write what comes out naturally and make it interesting than to worry about a word count. How do I know what foreshadowing elements I should drop into my first book, especially if my books are one massively epic story? Also, do I have to plot kinda the rest of the series to determine the elements that should be left in the first one? I hope this makes sense. So I did kind of discuss about my experience with this in some of the previous videos, but I think, again, it depends on how you want to do it. If you are the type of person who can see that far ahead and you kind of know where the story is going, then it can only help you to be able to write those elements in like little breadcrumbs throughout. I, however, am not detailed in that way. I can see kind of this book and what's maybe coming up next, but a lot of things just come out in the writing. So for example, in book 1 of my Shadow Demon saga, Lark has some kind of tattoo. We find out in book 2 that that tattoo is a butterfly. We don't find out until book 6 the significance of that butterfly on her back. However, I didn't know it was going to be significant in the way it was until I got to writing book 6. So you will find in my series lots of little breadcrumbs that I put in intuitively, but I didn't know how they would come full circle. And then they just sort of came together by the time I wrote the next book. Is this the best way to do it? Is it the most efficient way? I really don't think so. I think the more far out you can plan, the better. However, that being said, I have tried to plan further out, and what ends up happening is the story changes as I'm writing, and then I just wasted all that time doing a bunch of pre-planning that's no longer relevant. So again, I think the best advice I can give you is learn what your process is. Try it both ways. Try planning it out. And if you find that you're stuck for like 6 months trying to figure out book 6 when you're still just on book 2, then just let it go. Just continue writing book 2, let whatever comes come, and try to figure out your own process, because there is no like formula or this is the right way to do it. You don't have to have everything plotted out. Now, when it comes to trying to decide what elements go into book 1, it's going to be intuitive to some degree. And I know that's probably a frustrating answer, but this is the way it is for me, is you do the best you can, and you know as you're writing that there's going to be more to this story. And as you begin to write elements in, see what piques your interest. So for example, when I started working on my book, The Witch's Key, I knew there would be a key, but I didn't have all the details figured out as to what would go on with those keys. However, my character, as I'm writing, she sees another character that has a key that she's never seen before, and it's got like a sapphire in it, and she's thinking, ooh, I wonder what that sapphire means, but he quickly hides it. That wasn't something that I intended or planned. It's just something that came through in the writing. And now I can't remember if it actually is a sapphire or an emerald, but I'll figure it out before book 2. But that type of stuff, sometimes as I know I'm writing a big enough story, I just let those elements kind of reveal themselves. But you may be the type of writer that needs to plan every single thing like that. One of the main things you can do for yourself, though, is as you're writing your rough draft and those little things come up, like, ooh, he's got a key. Oh, he said something about his mom. I'm going to need to bring that up again in book 2. Oh, we just found out about this shady organization. I'm going to need to bring that up and figure out how it works in. Start making notes now. This is where a series Bible can really help you, or just at least a notebook where you can start writing down what I would call breadcrumbs and elements that you know are going to carry through. And once you start writing it down and you've told your brain, these are going to be important, the ideas will naturally start to come to you of like, oh, I know what I can do with that key. And sometimes those ideas will come when you least expect it. My best advice to you is just work through the process. Keep an eye on what elements might be important in future episodes. And then as you get to the end of this first book and you know it's this massively long story, go ahead before you publish it and be thinking, what elements are in this story that are going to carry through? And do I need, what's going to happen in book 2? And at least be thinking ahead to this next book and think, is there anything I need to set up here that isn't set up yet? And then try to weave that in. As long as you're working one book ahead, you're going to be okay. But I know for myself, now that I have more experience writing a longer series, that next time I want to think further ahead. And I think it can only help you if you can do that. How do you name your series versus naming the individual books? Okay, so I try to make sure that the name of the series, and I highly recommend you do this too, is as unique as possible. Individual books, it can start to get pretty difficult to name every single individual book something different because, as you know, now that there are no longer publishers who are the only gatekeepers, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of indie books. There may even be millions, I don't know, going on the market every year. It's an astronomical number of new books that are getting published, and words are going to be reused. Titles are going to be reused. It's just the way it is. And it's going to start to get really difficult to find a title, especially something like Into the Darkness or Lost in the Night, or whatever, that is not used already. So one thing that I would recommend to you is to come up with a series title that is unique. This can mean, like if you're writing a mystery, that your character's name is unique and therefore you name it after your character, like the Sookie Stackhouse series with Charlaine Harris. That is a unique series name because it is her character name. And Jack Reacher, for example, or, some of those other types of books, like they based on the character name, that can really work. Harry Potter and so on. Try to make your series title as unique as possible. Sometimes you will see people name their whole series after book 1. So for example, my series, the first book is called Beautiful Demons. I could have just called it the Beautiful Demons series and that would have been fine too. So you can go either way with it. When it comes to naming conventions though, I highly recommend that each individual book of your series seem like it's a part of the overall brand. So sorry to use my own example again, but it's the best way to do it for me. Beautiful demons, inner demons, bitter demons, shadow demons. And I use that recurring word each time. Carly Phillips, who I love, she's an amazing romance author. She has a Dare series and each book has the word dare, dare to love, dare to blah, 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 and so on. So you find like that recurring word or that recurring theme that you can bring back up each time. Or for example, another really good friend of mine is Danica Dark, and she has a series that is called the 7 series or whatever. So it's 7 years, 6 months, the next book is 5 weeks, and then 4 days, and so on. So that might not be exactly how it goes, but it's something like that. And so she's got this kind of what I call a naming convention, something that readers can see, oh, this is the 7 series and this is book 5 because it's got a big 5 on it and it's called 5 weeks, or whatever. So you've got that naming convention. So just sit down with yourself and think, okay, I want to come up with a unique series title. And then I want all the books to seem like they match each other in some way. Even if every single title isn't necessarily the most like unique title of all time, it's good to try your best to be unique with the series title and then brand those individual book titles so they all seem to match in some way. What are some bonus content ideas that series have, especially fantasy or sci-fi genres, like character designs, maps, and etc.? How do you feel about those being included? So this is really kind of cool. I think that when it comes to fantasy in particular, you definitely might have like maps. If you had a science fiction like alien type series, you might have like images or drawings done of what the different creatures look like, or the like schematics of the ship, or something that tells you like all the different stars in the galaxy or whatever like that. And I think those types of bonus materials can be amazing. Another type of common bonus material that you might find is like recipes or playlists that match the songs that you might have been listening to, or something that reminds you of the characters. Sometimes it can just be like a character interview, like you're the author interviewing the characters. So you can find lots of things like that if you go looking for it. So sometimes you've got stuff like posters or swag that's bonus. And sometimes in the book itself, you'll have a map of the world, or you'll have, for example, at the end of the Wheel of Time, every single time he has a list of some of the like main characters that you've met. Because it's this huge fantasy world, you know, he's kind of reminding you, it's sort of like a dictionary in the back of the book that says, you know, this land, okay, and it tells you a little bit about the land and the people that come from it, and it'll kind of give you an idea of the pronunciation and those kinds of things. And I think that depending on the type of book you're writing, that stuff can all help immerse your reader in the world. And anytime you can immerse your reader even more into that world, as if they feel like they're a part of it, you're doing really good things. Then some of that stuff becomes really good bonus, like giveaways and things. So let's say you have an amazing new fantasy series coming out and you had a map professionally drawn by an artist. You could include that map in the book itself, but you could also have a big poster of that map and get it framed and sell those on your website signed, and have people pay, you know, however much money for this special edition signed poster of the map of the land. And that is just going to help people be like, oh, I want to be a part of this world. So you could be thinking about some of those things. You could also do something unique, like having some kind of screensaver made of the map. And for everyone who pre-orders the book, they send you a receipt, you send them a desktop wallpaper of that map. So you can get really interesting results, or you can do really fun and innovative things with those sorts of extras. I know maps is one that you'll see most commonly, but with other types of series, like I said, you might see recipes, you might see playlists, you might see bonus like character sketches or fan art or things that go along with it. But yeah, I think that you kind of touched on some of those that are the main ones. And not only can it get readers talking, but it can also give you something else to keep sharing so that you're immersing people in the world. And I think it's a great idea to do that, but I just wouldn't put a ton of money into it until you're making money, because I think it's another one of those places where you could get lost and you could spend thousands of dollars getting character mock-ups and maps and all this stuff. And I don't think in the end it's going to help you sell like a ton more books. It's just going to be something fun that helps you build community, but it's probably not going to show through a lot in your actual sales and income. So use it as a bonus thing, but don't spend a ton of money on it until you've already got that community going and you know that money's coming back to you. How far in advance for a character's arc do you need to know as you're writing your first book? Thanks. Okay, so this kind of goes back to that same question before about how many elements. So for your character's arc, I do think if you've got a dynamic series where you're going to be writing a long series about this one particular character, I think it's good to know where this character is headed. Who are they at the beginning of the series, and who are they going to have to evolve into as far out as you can see? I didn't know when I first started writing Harper that she was going to be the heroine for 12 full books. So I didn't plan and map out her character arc for 12 books. It sort of began to happen naturally as an arc. But I did think ahead to those first 6 books. Once I got a couple books in, I was like, okay, I know she's going to be fighting this one big bad, and this is what we're all leading up to. And so I planned out her character arc maybe 3 or 4 books in advance. And I think that that can help you. I don't think you need to know the entire series, the whole thing, but it's important to identify right from the beginning, what is her wound? What are the things that are holding her back? How is she holding herself back? What's this lie that she tells herself? And how much is she going to overcome in this first book? How much does the reader need to see her overcome so that she can progress to the next book? Because readers are going to want to see some growth, but you can't give them all the growth in one book. It needs to kind of be meted out book by book. So I think it's a good idea to be thinking, okay, I can identify these things of where she is now, and I know what she's going to need to grow into over the course of multiple books. I don't think you necessarily need to say in book 1 she does this, in book 2 she does this, unless that works for you. But I think you do need to be thinking at least 2 or 3 books ahead about where her character or his character is going to go and how much they'll grow in these first few books. What is your recommended pricing for different lengths and book launch budgets? Okay, so this is another thing that is really difficult to talk about in a short Q&A, but I would say that pricing sometimes can be related to book length, but not always, and it can be more related to the type of genre that you're writing, and it can be related to, is this book 1 in the series and you're using it as a loss leader, or is it, book 5 in a series? Because you can get away with a higher price the deeper you are in a series because people are already invested and they know they're getting a certain type of quality book and they're willing to spend money on it. For your first book, though, you're using that as kind of a hook to get new readers in or a magnet to get new readers in. And you're using it as what is called a loss leader, usually, where you're willing to give that book up for a lower price to kind of entice readers in. Because at that point, readers don't necessarily know if you're writing great quality or not. That being said, if you're writing short stories, typically for, a 3 to 10,000 word short story, the most you're going to be able to get away with is $2.99. Even that is a stretch though. Most readers are going to be upset to get only 5,000 words for $2.99, with the exception of a genre like erotic romance. With erotic romance, you can charge higher prices for shorter works because there's a specific desire and outcome that's looked at for those books. Whereas when you're just telling a story that doesn't include erotic fiction, you're looking at 99 cents or $1.99 for those shorter stories. And then you can box them up like 3 or 4 stories in an anthology that you charge $2 or $3.99 for. And that's typically what you'll see. For novella length fiction, where you're talking about like 15 to 30,000 words or a little bit above that, you're probably looking at $2.99 kind of as your higher end price point and anything below. So some readers would love to see a novella at only 99 cents, but they're willing to pay $2.99 for it. When you go into full length novel categories, so you're talking about 35 to 40,000 words all the way up to, 100,000 words or more, it kind of all the same rules apply. $2.99 is a common price that you'll see for indie books, especially for authors that are not as established, newer authors that readers are taking a chance on, first books in a series, second books in a series. As you get more established and your books become more well-known or you're deeper in a series, most indies will price their books at $3 to $5.99. You won't see a lot of indies pricing their books higher than $5.99 regardless of price. So even if your book is 185,000 words, you can't usually get away with charging $8.99 for it as an indie because most people don't care so much about how long the book is. They care how much the book costs. So for the most part, I would base your costs on those kinds of parameters, and then the actual like full length books in your series, come up with a price that feels good for you and then experiment. The good thing is whenever you price your book, you can always change it. But for my books that are usually like deeper in a series, my books go anywhere from 75,000 words to 120,000 words, and they're typically $3.99. I probably could bump those up to $4.99 and make a little bit more money, but I also like to keep my books easily accessible to readers. So $3.99 has kind of been my price point, but I think you can go anywhere from that $2.99 to $5.99 and be in the right range there for a full-length novel. So Jewel asked, can you show us how you work with your PDFs on screen with an example? And I'm sorry to say that I can't do that in this particular thing, but if you're interested in seeing some of the PDFs, I do actually do walkthroughs for many of my PDFs. I have my writing schedule PDF has a walkthrough. My HB90 stuff has walkthroughs on how I plan my days, my how to plot a novel, how to edit a novel. I've taken you guys through exactly how I use those with examples. So if you're interested in seeing the majority of how I use those PDFs, you're going to have to look through the actual videos that discuss those particular freebies and find them. But they are there. Most of them are there, and I will link as many of them down below as I can. But I haven't stepped through all of the like writing word count trackers, so I probably will do a little bit more of that when I provide some things for October's Preptober coming up next month. But most of those walkthroughs for my PDFs are available in my previous videos. How much money can a person expect to spend being an indie publisher on average compared to traditional publishing? Okay, so I can give you a range, but I can't give you an exact number because everybody's going to spend a different amount of money. The main things that you're going to need to spend money on are your editing, which can include developmental editing, copy editing, and proofreading, all three or any of the three. Then you're probably going to need to spend money on cover art, which is something most of us can't do ourselves. And you're going to need to spend money on marketing. When you're first getting set up, you're also probably going to have some upfront expenses to get a website running and maybe some author branding or some images or something like that for promo. So those are kind of the main areas that you're going to spend money. But how much you spend is really going to depend on your personal budget and what you're willing to put into it. So I'll just quickly break down these different things. When it comes to your editing, for a developmental editor, you're going to be looking probably at a minimum of $400 at minimum, and it could go all the way up to $3,000. So this is why I say there's no exact number, but if you need to use a developmental editor where they're going to be telling you ways to fix plot holes and actually looking at the overall plot of your story, you can expect to spend on the low end $400, but for the most part, maybe more like $700 on average. If you need a copy editor or a line editor who's going to go through your book line by line and help you with sentence structure and style and formatting, they usually are not going to help you with too much of the overall plot of your story, but they will help you with the consistency and the style and of course your grammar. That you're going to probably on average spend between $200 and $2,000. $200 and $2,000. So again, there's a huge range depending on the experience of your editor, how quickly they work, how much education they have, how good they are to some degree, even though you will find some newer editors that will charge less money for this. I think on average, my copy editing ends up costing about $400 to $500 for copy edits. Then when it comes to proofreading, you can find anywhere from maybe $50 up to $300 for a proofread is kind of the average cost. When it comes to your editing, I highly recommend that at the very minimum, you get a proofreader in there, but some proofreaders are not even going to look at your book if it's not already well formatted and has a good grasp of grammar, because a proofreader is usually just that final read through to catch little typos and things like that. So if your story needs a lot of work, you're not going to be able to just use a proofreader. Okay, so let's say on average, if you're using a proper amount of editing, you're kind of looking at a minimum of $500 to $1,000 on your edits. When it comes to your cover art, again, you're looking at probably a minimum of $50 to $75 if you use a pre-made cover or you're using cover art that isn't super custom, like just an image with some typography written on it. If you are using a custom cover, like for example, my covers usually cost about $500 to $600. That is much more custom. It takes a lot of skill and Photoshop knowledge to be able to paint these covers. So it just takes a little bit more work or a lot more work. But I have also known author friends who have done an entire custom photo shoot with models that aren't coming from stock photos, and they have spent about $3,000 per cover. So there is a really big spread of what you can spend. I would never recommend to any just beginning brand new indie author to spend $3,000 on a cover shoot and all of that, because it's going to take you so long to earn your money back that you're going to have a struggle to produce more than one book. Something to keep in mind as an indie publisher is that you want to have a pretty good budget to be able to produce 3 to 5 books before you need to be making a ton of money back from it. If you only have the money to produce one book and you've got to wait until that book makes enough profit to pay for book 2, you're already going to be potentially in a really tough spot. So if you're going to be tight on budget, then I would go as tight on budget as possible to get decent stuff for your book. Like, you've got to balance it. So if you can only afford a proofreader, then I would try to find beta readers or friends that will go through your book with a fine-tooth comb so that that proofreader can get a hold of your book and really polish it. And then you only spent maybe $150 on that final proofread. Then you can find a really good cover art that has, you know, everything you need, but it might not be as custom, but it's a pre-made and it only costs you $75. So get started as much as you can on a shoestring budget. And then once you've started making money back after maybe 3 or 4 books and you start seeing money start to flow in, then you can go back and you can rebrand those covers or even have your books re-edited, which is something that I did. It's always a balance because you do need to have enough money and keep your expenses low enough to be able to produce that next book, because your best thing you can do is that next book. So again, let's say by now you've got your edits done and your cover art and you've spent about $650. Then you've got to think about marketing. I don't necessarily recommend that you do a ton of marketing on your first book in a series, but by the time the second book comes out, you might want to be spending a little bit of money advertising that first book as a loss leader. And again, of course, I go into this in detail in my Publish and Thrive course, but long story short is just that one of the best practices you can follow is when book 2 of your series comes out at full price, you drop book 1 to 99 cents and you put some of those ads toward it. It can be any of those like pay-per-click ads or the promo deal site ads, but you get a little bit of ads for your budget and bring new readers into that first series and hope that those readers go from book 1 to book 2 if you've done your job and written a good book. Then you start making money on the full price of book 2. Then you raise that price back up. And when you release book 3, you put a little bit more money into promotions. So with each book release, you're going to need a little bit of a budget, at least $100 to start advertising your book. So I would say on average, indies are going to spend between $700 and $3,000 per book every book you release. There are ways to do it on a more shoestring budget. So if you're interested in editing on a budget and things like that, go back and watch my videos on how to edit your novel. And of course, pre-made covers where you have an artist that has made a bunch of covers that are not really custom and then they add your book title to it. That's the best way to get decent cover art for really cheap. The trick with pre-mades, however, is if you're not buying an entire series, you might get that first book pretty cheap, but in order to make sure that second book is well branded to your whole series, you're going to have to pay for a custom cover for book 2. So it kind of all evens out. When it comes to traditional publishing, however, you shouldn't really be needing to spend any money. Your publisher should pay for your editing. Your publisher should pay for your cover art and that sort of thing. The main things that you'd have to pay for as a traditional publisher are like if you want to spend some money on your website or you want to get your branding done or that sort of thing, then you're going to need to put a little bit of money up front for those sort of things. And a website like hosting might cost you for the whole year $250 for the year. If you have someone design your whole website, like you're not just using a WordPress template and you have someone design your site, that can be anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000, depending on how much you want to spend. But you could do a website for free just on like Google Blogspot or something like that, and maybe spend $12 on a domain name that you can make look good. So there are lots of ways to do it. So if you guys want to see some advanced videos on how to publish on a budget or what average costs are for indie publishers and how to bring those costs down when you're first getting started, let me know in the comments and I will put together a video like that for you. Indie publishing is considerably more expensive than traditional publishing, but the return is also considerably higher. So whereas an author who's traditionally publishing might be making less than 20% royalty on their ebooks and less than 7% on their paperback books, you as an indie are going to be making 70%. It's a lot more return. So you can sell less books at a lower price and make more money than someone who is traditionally publishing. The other thing is you have complete control over your marketing, so you can market the books and make more money than a traditional author who doesn't have any control over what's done to market their books. Okay, so that concludes the first half of our Q&A. I have an entire second page, which will probably also take about an hour. So if you're interested in tuning into that, that will be up next week. Also, let me know in the comments comments if you have any other questions for me. And I will be, in the meantime, preparing for Preptober coming up in October. I'm going to have some free downloads for you and some advice on how to win NaNoWriMo, how to write faster, and how to be consistent. And I'm also going to have a video coming up for you about how to write a serial versus a series. And that will be a bonus video that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. And then all the planner stuff that I have coming for you. There's so much goodness. So if you're not subscribed, I would love for you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll get notified when new videos come up from me. If you are a subscriber, please go ahead and hit the like button so that I know you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment down below to let me know what you've thought of this series and if you'd like to see more series like this. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.